Welcome back, and thank you for tuning into Cheating Tales Lab. We appreciate every single one of you. We'd love to know, what part of the world are you watching from right now? Let us know in the comments. Now, let's dive into today's story. Brian Reese dribbled the basketball with practiced ease, his eyes fixed on his son Alex, who stood at the three-point line, shoulders slumped and attention divided between the court and the smartphone in his hand. The Sunday morning game, once their sacred ritual, had devolved into yet another reminder of the growing chasm between them. "Alex, heads up," Brian called out, passing the ball with perfect precision. The ball bounced off Alex's shoulder, causing him to drop his phone. The teenager's face contorted with anger as he scrambled to check his device for damage. "What the hell, Dad?" Alex snapped, brushing off his phone with exaggerated care. "You could have broken it." Brian maintained his composure, though his jaw tightened imperceptibly. As a criminal defense attorney who'd faced down hardened criminals and corrupt officials, he learned to read people's tells. The way Alex's eyes darted away, how his fingers fidgeted with the phone case. These weren't just signs of teenage rebellion. "Language, Alex," Brian warned, his voice carrying the same authority that had made judges pause in their chambers. "And we're here to play basketball, not check Instagram." Alex rolled his eyes, a gesture that sent a familiar surge of frustration through Brian's chest. "Whatever, Brian." The use of his first name hit like a physical blow, but Brian didn't flinch. "I've got stuff to do anyway. Chemistry homework." "It's Sunday morning," Brian countered, retrieving the ball. "You always do your homework on Friday nights." "Another tell." Alex's left eye twitched slightly. "A lie. People change," Alex muttered, already walking toward the gym exit. "Unlike some people, I've got better things to do than obsess over some stupid game." Brian watched his sons retreating back, his mind automatically cataloging the changes of the past few months. The subtle shift in vocabulary, new expressions that didn't match Alex's usual patterns, the deliberate use of Brian instead of Dad. It all pointed to external influence. Someone was rewriting his son's script. At home, Brian found Juana in her home office, surrounded by patient files. His wife's dark hair was pulled back in a severe bun, her reading glasses perched on the edge of her nose as she reviewed her notes. The sight of her still stirred something in his chest, even after 17 years of marriage, but lately, that feeling was tinged with an unfamiliar uncertainty. "Alex left the game early again," Brian said, leaning against the doorframe. He observed her reaction carefully, the slight stiffening of her shoulders, the pause in her writing that lasted a fraction too long. "He's 15, Brian," Juana replied without looking up. "You can't expect him to spend every Sunday playing basketball with his father forever." Her tone was reasonable, professional, the same voice she used with difficult patience. "This controlling behavior of yours is exactly why he's pulling away." Brian's eyes narrowed slightly. "Controlling? Since when is wanting to spend time with my son controlling?" Now Juana did look up, her expression a perfect blend of concern and mild exasperation. "You're doing it again, Amor. Analyzing everything like it's one of your cases. Not everything is a conspiracy." She stood up and approached him, placing a hand on his chest. "He's just growing up. It's normal." Brian had seen that same disconnect countless times in the courtroom. Defendants trying to appear sincere while lying through their teeth. The observation settled in his gut like cold lead. "Maybe you're right," he conceded, watching her reaction. Relief flickered across her features too quickly. "I should give him space." "Exactly," Juana said, patting his chest before returning to her desk. "Now, I have patient notes to review. We're short-staffed at the clinic this week, so I might be home late tomorrow." Brian nodded, already mentally noting the information for later verification. "Of course. Don't work too hard." That evening, Brian sat in his home office, reviewing case files while monitoring the sounds of the house. Alex's music thumped through the walls, new artists he'd never listened to before. The front door opened and closed as Juana left for her evening yoga class, the third this week, despite her usual twice-weekly routine. He opened his laptop and pulled up Alex's recent grade reports. The steady decline was subtle enough that most parents might miss it, but the pattern was clear to his trained eye. His son's English essays showed shifts in writing style, New phrases that didn't match his previous work. Small changes, but significant ones. Brian's phone buzzed with a text from Alex. Going to Matt's house to study? Another tell. Alex usually asked permission, not just announced his plans. The changes were accelerating, becoming more obvious. Someone was systematically dismantling the relationships and habits he'd built with his son, and they were doing it with professional precision. He picked up a framed photo from his desk, Alex's 13th birthday, just 2 years ago. His son was beaming at the camera, one arm around Brian's waist, the other clutching his first professional basketball. The Alex in that photo wouldn't have missed their Sunday Game 4 homework. That Alex wouldn't have called him Brian. I'm missing something, he muttered, studying the recent family photos on his wall. Each one told a story of subtle changes. Alex's growing distance, Juana's increasingly practiced smiles, the gradual separation in their positioning. As a defense attorney, he'd learned that the most damaging betrayals were never sudden. They were slow, methodical, built on countless small deceptions. He turned back to his computer, opening a new document. At the top, he typed behavioral changes, Alex, and began listing his observations with the same meticulous attention to detail that had won him countless cases. Someone was playing a long game, and they'd chosen his family as their target. In the courtroom, Brian had earned a reputation for being ruthless with those who attempted to manipulate the truth. Defendants who tried to deceive him often found themselves trapped by their own lies, their carefully constructed stories dismantled piece by piece until only the ugly truth remained. He'd shown no mercy to those who betrayed the principles of justice. But this wasn't the courtroom. This was his family, and someone was trying to take it apart with surgical precision. Whoever they were, they'd made a crucial mistake. They'd assumed that Brian's professional persona was just a mask, that the man beneath it was softer, more forgiving. They were wrong. The ruthless attorney who'd made corrupt officials confess on the stand, who'd reduced hardened criminals to tearful admissions, that wasn't a persona. It was who he was. And someone was about to learn the hard way that betraying Brian Reese was the last mistake they'd ever make. Hugo McBride shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his fingers drumming an erratic pattern on Brian's office desk. In 15 years as Brian's paralegal, he'd never seen his friend and boss lose a case. But this wasn't about a case, and Hugo knew that personal betrayals cut deeper than any legal battle. Just tell me, Hugo, Brian said, his voice carrying the same calm authority that had made witnesses crack on the stand. What did you see? Hugo took a deep breath, his loyalty to Brian warring with the weight of what he had to share. I was at Riverside Cafe yesterday, getting lunch. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Juana was there. Brian's expression remained neutral, but his eyes sharpened with predatory focus. Go on. She wasn't alone, Hugo continued, watching his friend's reaction. She was with Jack Aldrich. The name hung in the air like smoke. Brian's fingers stilled on his pen, the only visible reaction to the revelation. Hugo had been there during the law school days, had witnessed the systematic campaign of sabotage that Jack had waged against Brian. The accidentally deleted study materials before the bar exam had just been the culmination of years of subtle undermining. Tell me everything, Brian commanded, pulling out a legal pad. Every detail you can remember. Hugo leaned forward, his voice dropping despite the privacy of Brian's office. They were at a corner table, the kind you choose when you don't want to be seen. Body language was intimate. He kept touching her hand, and she wasn't pulling away. He hesitated before adding, they looked comfortable together, Brian, like it wasn't their first meeting. Brian's pen moved across the pad, recording every word with mechanical precision. What time was this? Around 1:30. Her usual clinic lunch hour. Hugo watched as Brian made a note, probably comparing it against Juana's stated schedule. There's more. They were looking at something on Jack's phone, photos, I think. And Juana, he swallowed hard. She was showing him something on hers. They were laughing. Brian's pen paused. Did you hear what they were discussing? Not much. But I heard Alex's name. Hugo met Brian's gaze directly. Jack said something about basketball. About building trust. The pen snapped in Brian's grip, ink staining his fingers. He regarded the broken pieces with clinical detachment before carefully wiping his hands. Jack Aldrich, he said, the name coming out like a prosecutor's opening statement, hasn't changed his methods. Still trying to take what's mine. Hugo remembered the aftermath of the bar exam incident. While others had seen Brian's calm acceptance of Jack's apology as forgiveness, Hugo had recognized it for what it was, strategic patience. Brian had waited, gathered evidence of Jack's broader misconduct at their firm, and then presented it with devastating precision. Jack's suspension had seemed like karma to most, but Hugo knew better. It had been execution. There's a pattern here, Brian mused, pulling out his phone. He scrolled through something. Photos, Hugo realized. Alex's new attitude, Juana's extra yoga classes, the changes in routine. Jack's always been methodical, but sloppy in the details. What are you going to do? Hugo asked, though he already knew the answer. He'd seen that look in Brian's eyes before, in cases where the truth had been buried under layers of lies and manipulation. Brian's smile was cold, professional. For now, nothing. When you're hunting snakes, Hugo, you don't strike at the first sight of scales. You wait until you can see the whole nest. He turned his computer screen, showing a calendar with highlighted dates and times. Juana has 3 yoga classes scheduled this week. Let's see where she really goes. Brian, Hugo said carefully, if you need anything, surveillance, documents, whatever, I'm here. You know that, right? I know, Brian replied, his voice softening slightly. You've always been loyal, Hugo. That's why you're the only one I trust with this. He stood, straightening his tie with practiced precision. For now, keep watching. Document everything. If you see them together again, don't intervene. Just record, photograph, observe. Hugo nodded, recognizing the shift from friend to strategist. And Jack? Should we warn him off? No, Brian said, his expression hardening. Let him think he's clever. Let them both think they're winning. He picked up the broken pen, examining the splatter pattern of ink on his legal pad. The best victories aren't won in dramatic confrontations, Hugo. They're won in quiet moments, when your opponents are too busy congratulating themselves to notice the noose tightening. As Hugo stood to leave, Brian's voice stopped him at the door. Hugo? Thank you for being the kind of friend who brings bad news directly. The words were genuine, but carried an undercurrent of steel. Unlike some people, you understand the value of loyalty. Hugo nodded, suppressing a shiver. He'd seen Brian destroy opponents in court, had watched him dismantle lies with surgical precision. But this was different. This was personal. And Hugo knew that when Brian Reese took something personally, he didn't just win. He annihilated. One more thing, Brian called out. If you see them again, pay attention to how they interact with their phones. Jack's always been careless with digital footprints. His smile was razor-sharp. And in my experience, people who think they're cleverly covering their tracks usually leave the clearest trail. Hugo left the office, his steps heavy with the weight of what was to come. He just lit the fuse on what promised to be an explosive revelation, and knowing Brian, the blast radius would be precisely calculated for maximum damage. Susanna Gillespie's voice trembled slightly over the phone, the concern in her tone setting off alarm bells in Brian's mind. Mr. Reese, I've been teaching high school mathematics for 20 years, she began, and I've learned to trust my instincts about students. Something's wrong with Alex. Brian sat forward in his office chair, his free hand already pulling up a fresh document on his computer. Go on, Mrs. Gillespie. Tell me exactly what's concerning you. It's not just the dropping grades, she continued. Alex has always been one of my best students, but lately, he's been different, distant. And today, she paused, gathering her thoughts. Today he said something that worried me deeply. Brian's fingers hovered over the keyboard. What did he say? We were discussing his latest test results, a C-, very unlike him. When I asked if everything was okay at home, Another pause. He said his new dad understands him better than his workaholic father ever could. The words hit Brian like physical blows, but his voice remained steady. His new dad? Did he elaborate? No, but he became very defensive when I asked. Mr. Reese. Susanna lowered her voice. Last week, I saw a man picking Alex up after basketball practice. Not you. He was tall, well-dressed. They seemed familiar with each other. Brian's jaw tightened. Did you happen to notice what kind of car they left in? A black Mercedes, newer model. I remember because it had a law firm parking permit in the window. Aldrich and Associates, I think. The pen in Brian's hand creaked under sudden pressure. Thank you, Mrs. Gillespie. You've been very helpful. One last thing. Has Alex's phone usage during class changed recently? Yes, actually. He's constantly checking it, especially during lunch period. I've had to warn him several times, which isn't like him at all. After ending the call, Brian sat in silence for several minutes, his mind working through the implications. Jack Aldrich wasn't just having an affair with Juana. He was systematically inserting himself into Alex's life, using Brian's own son as a weapon against him. The next hours passed in a blur of focused activity. Brian's fingers flew across his keyboard, documenting every detail while making calls to trusted contacts. By evening, he had everything arranged. The monitoring software for the family computers would be delivered discreetly, and Jackie Muller, his firm's most reliable private investigator, was already running background checks on Jack's recent activities. At home, Brian maintained his usual routine, watching his wife and son with new awareness. Alex barely looked up from his phone during dinner, while Juana chatted about her day with practiced animation. Every gesture, every casual mention of her schedule, now carried new weight. I'm worried about Alex's grades, Brian mentioned carefully, watching Juana's reaction. Mrs. Gillespie called today. Juana's fork paused halfway to her mouth. That nosy woman, she said, her tone dismissive. She should mind her own business. My grades are fine, Alex snapped, still not looking up from his phone. Just because I'm not perfect like you want me to be, Brian, doesn't mean there's a problem. I didn't say you had to be perfect, Brian replied evenly, noting how Juana didn't correct Alex's use of his first name. I said I was worried. There's a difference. Yeah, right. Alex stood abruptly. I'm done. Going to my room. Alex, Juana called after him, her tone indulgent. Don't forget you have that study group tomorrow after school. Brian watched the exchange with growing certainty. Juana wasn't just failing to support his parental authority, she was actively undermining it. Each small interaction was another brick in the wall being built between him and his son. Later that night, after the house had gone quiet, Brian sat in his home office, methodically installing the monitoring software on their network. Each keystroke felt like another piece of evidence in what he already knew would be a devastating case. His phone buzzed with a text from Jackie Muller. Background check on Aldrich complete. Found something interesting. Can we meet? Brian's response was immediate. My office. Tomorrow. 7 a.m. He turned back to his computer, fingers moving with practiced efficiency as he completed the software installation. The program would log every keystroke, every website visited, every message sent or received on their home network. It wasn't just about gathering evidence anymore. It was about understanding the full scope of the betrayal. A soft knock at his office door made him look up. Alex stood in the doorway, looking younger and more vulnerable than he had at dinner. Dad. The words slipped out naturally, unlike his earlier forced use of Brian. Can I talk to you? Brian carefully kept his expression neutral, though his mind raced with possibilities. Of course. Come in. Alex shuffled into the room, phone clutched in his hand like a lifeline. I'm sorry about dinner. And basketball. And he trailed off, looking lost. Sit down, son, Brian said gently, watching as Alex sank into the leather chair across from his desk, the same chair where countless clients had sat, seeking protection from those who'd wronged them. What's on your mind? Alex's fingers tightened around his phone. Sometimes I feel like you're disappointed in me. Like I'm not good enough. Brian recognized the words, not his son's natural pattern of speech. Someone had planted this seed, nurtured it. Alex, look at me. He waited until his son's eyes met his. You've never disappointed me. Not once. But you're always working, Alex countered, the words carrying an echo of someone else's influence. You missed my last 3 games. I was in court, Brian explained, keeping his voice steady despite the anger building in his chest. Not at Alex, but at those manipulating him, fighting to keep an innocent man out of prison. Sometimes our duties have to come before our desires. That's what Imowana says, Alex said, quickly correcting himself. That you always put your cases before family. The slip was telling. Someone was coaching Alex to use their first names, to create distance. Your mother said that? No, I mean, Alex looked down at his phone again. I should go. I have homework. Alex, Brian called as his son stood to leave. You know you can tell me anything, right? Anything at all. For a moment, something flickered in Alex's eyes, a desire to speak, to confide. Then his phone buzzed, and the moment shattered. Yeah, sure. Good night, Dad. After Alex left, Brian sat in the darkness of his office, replaying every word of their conversation. His son was being pulled in multiple directions, manipulated by people who should have been protecting him. But they'd made a crucial mistake. They'd underestimated both Brian's perception and his capacity for retribution. He pulled up his email and began composing a message to his most trusted associates at the firm. The subject line read, Priority Investigation, Personal Matter. The message was brief but clear. He needed their best resources, complete discretion, and absolute loyalty. As he worked late into the night, Brian could hear movement in the house. Juana's footsteps in their bedroom, the soft ping of Alex's phone receiving late-night messages. His family was being torn apart by invisible strings, but soon he would expose every puppet and puppeteer. The monitoring software blinked silently on his screen, already logging data. In the morning, he would meet with Jackie Muller and begin assembling the pieces of this puzzle. But for now, he sat in his office, a predator waiting patiently in the darkness, preparing to strike at those who dared to threaten what was his. The final lines of his email to the firm carried a weight that would soon become clear to everyone involved. This isn't just about gathering evidence. This is about justice. And those who have betrayed my trust will learn that in my courtroom, justice is absolute. Jackie Muller spread the surveillance photos across Brian's desk, each image a carefully documented betrayal. Her practiced hands arranged them in chronological order, telling a story that made Brian's jaw clench with controlled fury. They're not even trying to be subtle anymore, Jackie said, tapping a photo showing Juana and Jack entering a cafe near Alex's school. Your wife's been meeting him 3 times a week for the past month, always during her supposed clinic hours or yoga classes. Brian picked up one photo, studying the timestamp. This was taken during Alex's basketball game last Tuesday. The one I couldn't attend because of the Morrison trial. Exactly. Jackie pulled out her tablet, swiping through a series of text message screenshots. They're coordinating their movements. Look at this exchange from last week. Brian leaned forward, reading the messages between his wife and his former friend. Juana, be tied up with the Morrison case. Perfect timing for some quality time with Jack, already near the school. We'll catch him after practice. Got those basketball stats you sent. Kid's going to love hearing about my college games. Juana, perfect. He's so desperate for a father who gets Kim. B makes it too easy with his workaholic routine. Brian's fingers whitened around the edge of his desk, but his voice remained perfectly controlled. Show me everything. Every meeting, every text, every accidental encounter. Jackie nodded, pulling up more evidence on her tablet. They've been orchestrating these run-ins for months. Jack shows up at the mall when Juana takes Alex shopping. He happens to be at the same restaurants, the same basketball games. All carefully planned. The monitoring software Brian had installed painted an even darker picture. Screenshots showed Juana sending Jack detailed information about Alex's interests, his schedule, even his frustrations with Brian's work hours. She's coaching him, Brian observed, his analytical mind cataloging each betrayal, teaching him how to manipulate my son. There's more. Jackie pulled up an audio file. This was recorded at the cafe yesterday. Your wife wasn't just sharing information. She was actively poisoning Alex against you. The recording played with crystal clarity. Your father's always been selfish. Juana's voice dripped with practiced concern. Remember last month's science fair? He chose a client meeting over your presentation. That's just who he is, Mijo. He cares more about his clients than his family. Alex's response was hesitant. He said it was an important case. They're all important cases, Juana cut in. That's what he always says. Thank goodness you have Jack now. Someone who actually makes time for you. Brian's expression hardened as he listened to his wife systematically dismantling his relationship with his son. Each word was calculated, each sympathy designed to create distance. The science fair meeting, he said quietly. That was a bail hearing for a domestic violence victim. I got her away from her abuser that day. Alex knew that. He said he understood. They're using your dedication against you, Jackie observed, turning your responsibilities into weapons. Brian stood, moving to his office window. His reflection showed the same composed expression he wore in court, but his eyes held the cold fury that had made guilty men confess on the stand. Where else have they been meeting? Jackie pulled up a map on her tablet. I've documented 37 accidental encounters in the past 3 months. The mall, the basketball court, the school parking lot. Jack's been inserting himself into every aspect of Alex's life. She highlighted several locations. These are the most frequent meeting spots. This cafe near the school, the basketball court at the community center, and... She hesitated. And your house, Brian, when you're in court. He's been there at least 6 times in the past month. Brian turned from the window, his movement deliberate and controlled. In my house, security footage shows him staying for hours. They're comfortable there. Too comfortable. Brian returned to his desk, examining each piece of evidence with methodical precision. The monitoring software on Alex's devices, what has it shown? Text messages, mostly. Jack playing the role of the understanding mentor. Your dad just doesn't get you like I do. You can talk to me about anything. He's building trust, creating dependency. Brian nodded slowly, his mind already calculating moves and countermoves. And Juana facilitates everything. She's the architect, Jackie confirmed. She tells Jack what to say, how to act, which buttons to push. She's using her psychology background to maximize the impact. My wife, Brian said, the words carrying a weight of finality, has forgotten who she's dealing with. He began organizing the evidence into precise piles. Continue the surveillance. I want every meeting documented, every conversation recorded. And Jackie? Yes? Get me everything you can on Jack's current cases. Every client, every strategy, every potential ethics violation. He's gotten sloppy over the years. Find me his mistakes. Jackie recognized the tone. It was the same one Brian used before dismantling a witness on the stand. What about your wife? Brian's smile was razor-thin. Juana thinks she understands manipulation because she studied psychology. She's about to learn the difference between theory and practice. As Jackie gathered her materials, Brian's phone buzzed with a text from Alex. Can't make dinner tonight. Studying with friends. Another lie. Another orchestrated moment. One more thing. Brian called as Jackie reached the door. Get me the security footage from my house. Every minute Jack's been there. Every conversation. Every interaction. Of course. Jackie paused. Brian, they're not just having an affair, are they? This is something bigger. Much bigger, Brian agreed, his eyes on the evidence before him. They're trying to take my son, using my own profession against me. Parental alienation as a legal strategy. His laugh held no humor. They've forgotten the first rule of law. Never challenge someone who knows the game better than you do. As Jackie left, Brian began typing on his computer, his fingers moving with precise purpose. They thought they were playing a long game, using his son as a pawn in their elaborate scheme. They were about to learn that when it came to strategic patience, to calculated revenge, they were facing a grandmaster. Marianne Hester paced Brian's office, her basketball coach's whistle swinging with agitated energy. I should have come to you sooner, she said, running a hand through her short gray hair. Something felt off about him from the first day he showed up at practice. Brian sat behind his desk, a digital recorder capturing every word. Tell me everything, Coach Hester. From the beginning. It started about 2 months ago, Marianne began, finally settling into a chair. This guy shows up at practice, introduces himself as Alex's uncle. Jack something. Aldrich, Brian supplied, his tone neutral. Right. Said he wanted to support Alex's basketball development. Marianne's eyes narrowed at the memory. Started showing up regularly, always positioning himself where Alex could see him. Making these little comments. What kind of comments? Subtle stuff at first. Your dad never played basketball in college, did he? Must be hard having a father who's too busy for games. Always with this concerned look, like he was just trying to help. Brian nodded, remembering Jackie's surveillance photos of these seemingly casual encounters. How did Alex respond? That's what really worried me. Marianne leaned forward, her coach's intensity showing through. Alex started changing his game, playing more aggressively, taking risks he shouldn't, trying to impress this guy who kept filling his head with stories about college basketball glory days. She pulled out her phone, scrolling through photos. I started documenting things. Dates, times, conversations I overheard. Something about that man set off every warning bell I've developed in 30 years of coaching. Brian gestured to the digital recorder. Would you mind sharing those details? That's why I'm here. Marianne's voice hardened. Last week, I overheard him asking Alex questions about your cases. Specific questions about your high-profile clients. When Alex seemed uncomfortable, he backed off, played it like casual interest. But I've seen predators groom kids before, Mr. Reese. This wasn't casual. No, Brian agreed, his expression darkening. It wasn't. Then yesterday, Marianne hesitated. Yesterday, he made Alex really uncomfortable. Started asking about your home security system, your office setup. Said something about wanting to surprise you with a visit. Alex looked scared, Mr. Reese. That's when I knew I had to act. Brian leaned forward slightly. What did you do? I gave Alex a camera, Marianne said firmly. One of those tiny ones we use to analyze player movements. Showed him how to hide it in his backpack. Told him if this uncle made him uncomfortable again, he should record it. A flash of approval crossed Brian's face. That was good thinking, Coach Hester. I've lost too many kids to adults who didn't have their best interests at heart, Marianne stated flatly. I wasn't going to let it happen to Alex. Not on my watch. The camera, Brian said carefully. Does anyone else know about it? Just me and Alex. And now you. Marianne met his gaze directly. I told him to trust his instincts. If something felt wrong, record it. No one would ever know. Brian stood, moving around his desk with deliberate calm. You've done exactly the right thing, Coach Hester. But I need to ask you something else now. Something that could help protect Alex. Anything. Would you be willing to continue observing? To let Jack think his visits are still under the radar? The camera was an excellent idea, but we might need more. Marianne straightened in her chair. You want me to play along? Let him think he's getting away with it? For now, Brian confirmed, we need to understand the full scope of what he's doing. Every question he asks, every attempt to get close to Alex. Can you do that? Of course. Marianne's expression hardened. But Mr. Reese, if he crosses a line, if he puts Alex in any danger, he won't. Brian's voice carried absolute certainty. Because you're going to be there, watching, recording, and if he tries anything, I'll have everything I need to destroy him. Marianne studied him for a moment, recognizing the protective fury behind his professional demeanor. You're building a case against him. Against all of them, Brian corrected. And when I'm done, they'll wish they'd never heard the name Reese. All of them? Marianne's eyes widened slightly. You mean? I mean everyone involved in manipulating my son. Brian's smile was cold. Every single one. Count me in, Marianne declared, standing. I'll keep notes on every interaction, every conversation. And Mr. Reese? I'm sorry about your wife. Alex let it slip that she's been. Encouraging this, Brian's expression didn't change, but something dangerous flickered in his eyes. My wife has made her choices, Coach Hester. Soon she'll learn about consequences. As Marianne left, Brian returned to his desk, adding her statement to his growing collection of evidence. Another ally in place, another piece of the puzzle coming together. Jack and Juana thought they were being clever, using his son's basketball practice as cover for their manipulation. They'd forgotten one crucial detail. In any game, the best players weren't always the most obvious ones. And Brian had just recruited a valuable piece to his side of the board. The video played on Brian's laptop with perfect clarity, every word a nail in the coffin of betrayal. Jack Aldrich's voice filled the office, smooth and practiced. Your father's cases, Alex, the high-profile ones. He must have quite a security system at home to protect all that sensitive information. Alex's voice was hesitant, the hidden camera in his backpack capturing his nervous fidgeting. I don't really know about that stuff. Come on, kiddo, Jack pressed, his tone carefully casual. You must have noticed something. Security cameras? Alarm codes? Your dad's quite paranoid about his files, isn't he? Before Alex could respond, Juana's voice cut in. Jack, remember what we discussed. Alex needs to trust you naturally. The recording continued, documenting their systematic attempt to extract information about Brian's cases and security measures. Each question was carefully crafted, each response noted. They thought they were being subtle. They didn't know they were documenting their own downfall. Brian closed the laptop as Juana entered his home office. Her smile faltered slightly at his expression. We need to talk, she said, closing the door behind her. Do we? Brian's voice was perfectly controlled, his posture relaxed. About what? About your controlling behavior, Juana declared, gaining confidence. About how you're driving our son away with your obsession with work, your constant suspicion. Brian waited, letting her continue. Each word was another piece of evidence, another nail in her carefully constructed coffin. Alex needs a father who understands him, she pressed. Someone who can give him the attention you never could. I've been watching you push him away for years, and I won't stand for it anymore. Is that what you've been watching? Brian asked softly. Or have you been watching your careful manipulation finally bear fruit? Juana's expression flickered. What are you talking about? Tell me about Jack Aldrich, Brian suggested, his tone conversational. Tell me about all those accidental meetings, those carefully orchestrated encounters. Tell me about teaching our son to hate me. Something shifted in Juana's eyes, a flash of triumph, quickly masked by concern. Is that what this is about? You're jealous because Alex has found a better male role model? Better? Brian's laugh held no humor. A disgraced lawyer who got suspended for misconduct? A man who's so desperate for revenge he'd use a child as a weapon? I've been teaching your son to hate you, Juana suddenly declared, her mask dropping. Introduced him to his new dad. Isn't that fascinating? Brian watched her, noting every micro-expression, every tell. Go on, he encouraged softly. Say more. You're so caught up in your cases, your precious justice, she spat. You never saw it coming. Months of careful work, showing Alex exactly who you really are. And now? Her smile was triumphant. Now he can't stand you. Why aren't you angry? She demanded as Brian remained calm. Where's that famous temper you show in court? Because your lover doesn't know my son recorded everything, Brian replied coolly, opening his laptop again. And my lawyers have already prepared everything. I'm not just divorcing you. I'm putting you both in jail. The color drained from Juana's face as her own voice played from the speakers, documenting months of calculated manipulation. You've been sloppy, Querida, Brian said, his voice carrying the same tone he used when destroying witnesses on the stand. You left a trail. Text messages. Videos. Witnesses. Did you really think you could outmaneuver me in my own game? You can't prove anything, Juana whispered, but her confidence was cracking. Can I? Brian stood slowly. Every meeting with Jack, documented. Every attempt to extract information about my cases, recorded. Every manipulation of our son, preserved. You're not just looking at divorce, Juana. You're looking at conspiracy, attempted interference with attorney-client privilege, and psychological abuse of a minor. You wouldn't dare, she challenged. Not to Alex's mother. The mother who used her psychology license to manipulate her own child? Brian's smile was predatory. The one who conspired with a suspended lawyer to access privileged information? That mother? Juana moved toward the door, but Brian's words stopped her. Oh, and Juana? Those trust fund documents you and Jack were so interested in? They've already been modified. New trustees, new conditions. You'll never see a penny of Alex's inheritance. This isn't over, she hissed. Actually, Brian corrected her. It was over the moment you decided to use my son as a weapon against me. You just didn't know it yet. As Juana fled the office, Brian returned to his evidence files. The confrontation had gone exactly as planned. Every word, every reaction had been recorded, adding to the mountain of evidence he'd accumulated. His phone buzzed. A message from Jackie Muller. Jack just left his office. Heading your way. Brian smiled coldly. Perfect timing. He activated the office security system's recording function and waited. Jack would come charging in, thinking he was supporting Juana, not knowing he was walking into a carefully laid trap. The sound of angry footsteps echoed through the house. Brian counted silently 3, 2, 1. Jack burst into the office, his expensive suit wrinkled from rushing over. What the hell did you say to her? He demanded. Jack, Brian acknowledged calmly, not bothering to stand. Please, come in. We have so much to discuss. You think you can threaten her? Jack's face was flushed with anger. You're not the only one with evidence, Brian. We've documented your neglect, your obsession with work, my cases. Brian interrupted smoothly. Is that what you've been so interested in? Tell me, how many times did you pump my son for information about my clients? My security systems? My files? Jack's expression flickered. That's ridiculous. I was just being friendly, showing interest in accessing privileged information, Brian finished. He opened his laptop, turning it to face Jack. Would you like to see the recordings? Or should we start with the text messages where you and my wife planned your accidental encounters with my son? You're paranoid, Jack scoffed, but his eyes darted to the laptop screen. This is exactly why Alex needs a better father figure. A better father figure? Brian's voice carried the same deadly calm that had made hardened criminals confess. Like a suspended lawyer desperate enough to manipulate a child for revenge? To use him to access confidential case files? He pressed play on one of the recordings. Jack's own voice filled the room, asking Alex pointed questions about Brian's high-profile cases, about security measures, about client meetings. You recorded me? Jack's confidence cracked slightly. That's illegal. In my house? With my son? Brian stood slowly. Everything you did was recorded, Jack. Every question, every manipulation, every attempt to access privileged information. Did you really think I wouldn't protect my home? My family? My cases? You can't prove intent, Jack argued, but his legal training was kicking in, recognizing the trap he'd walked into. Can I? Brian's smile was lethal. Let's talk about your recent cases. The ones where you've mysteriously known your opponent's strategies. The coincidental timing of your meetings with my son and subsequent court victories. Jack's face paled. You wouldn't what? Report multiple ethics violations to the Bar Association? Document your attempted interference with attorney-client privilege? Press charges for conspiracy and exploitation of a minor. Brian's voice hardened. You tried to steal my son, Jack. Did you really think I'd show mercy? We were helping him. Jack protested, showing him the truth about his father. The truth? Brian's laugh was cold. The truth is that you and my wife thought you could outmaneuver me in my own arena. You forgot who I am, Jack. What I do. How I think. He pressed another button on his laptop, and the office filled with the sound of Juana's earlier confession. Jack's expression crumbled as he heard their entire plan laid bare in his lover's own words. It's over, Brian stated flatly. The trust fund you were after? Secured. My son? Protected. Your legal career? His smile was merciless. Well, that ended the moment you tried to use him to access my cases. You're bluffing, Jack tried, but his voice wavered. You wouldn't risk Alex being dragged through this? Risk? Brian's eyes gleamed dangerously. Everything's already in motion, Jack. The evidence has been submitted. The authorities notified. The Bar Association informed. He leaned forward slightly. You're not just losing your license this time. You're facing criminal charges. Jack stumbled backward, his carefully constructed plan crumbling around him. Brian, we can talk about this. We just did. Brian cut him off. And now you're going to leave my house, my family, and my life. The next time we meet will be in court. His voice dropped to a deadly whisper. And Jack? If you ever come near my son again, losing your law license will be the least of your concerns. As Jack fled the office, Brian sat back in his chair, surveying the evidence spread across his desk. Months of surveillance, recordings, documented manipulation, all leading to this moment. They thought they were playing a long game, using his son as a pawn in their revenge. They'd forgotten the most important rule: never challenge a man who had made his career out of turning people's own words and actions against them. A man who had built his reputation on being merciless with those who betrayed justice. A man who, when it came to protecting his son, had no capacity for forgiveness. Alex sat across from Brian in his father's office, back straight, eyes clear and focused. Gone was the rebellious teenager who'd been pulling away for months. In his place sat a young man who'd learned the hard way about manipulation and betrayal. "I need you to understand something, Dad," Alex said, placing his phone on the desk. "I didn't just record them. I played them." Brian leaned forward, his expression carefully neutral. "Show me." Alex pulled up a series of text messages, each one meticulously documented and time-stamped. "Every time Jack asked about your cases, I gave him just enough to keep him interested. Vague details, half-truths." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Just like you taught me about cross-examination. Make them think they're getting what they want." "When did you start suspecting?" Brian asked, pride warring with concern in his chest. "The basketball games," Alex replied, pulling up more evidence on his phone. Jack's stories didn't add up. He claimed to have played college ball at Stanford, but when I checked online, his name wasn't in any of their records. He paused, meeting his father's gaze. "That's when I started really paying attention." Brian nodded, recognizing his own methodical approach in his son's actions. "Tell me everything." "They thought I was just a stupid kid." Alex's voice hardened. "But I'm your son. I know how to spot someone fishing for information." He pulled out a small notebook, filled with detailed notes. "Every meeting, every question, every time they tried to turn me against you. I documented it all." He pushed play on one of the recordings. Jack's voice filled the room. "Your father's cases must be fascinating, Alex. All those high-profile clients, sensitive information. He must have quite a setup at home to protect everything." Alex's recorded response was perfectly calibrated, hesitant enough to seem genuine, vague enough to be useless. "I guess. I mean, he has some security stuff, but I don't really know about it." "This was 2 weeks ago," Alex explained, stopping the recording. "Right after he started asking more specific questions about your home office. That's when I realized this wasn't just about Mom's affair or trying to get custody." Brian's expression darkened. "They were after client information." "Not just that." Alex pulled up another recording. This time, Juana's voice. "Your father's biggest case right now, the Morrison trial. He must be keeping evidence at home, files, recordings." She was using her psychology background. Alex continued, disgust evident in his voice. "Trying to make me feel important by confiding in me, asking for help in understanding your work." But she slipped up. "Started asking too many specific questions about your clients." Brian studied his son, seeing not just a teenager but a strategic mind that matched his own. "You gathered all this evidence yourself?" "Most of it," Alex nodded. "Coach Hester helped with the technical stuff, showing me how to hide the camera, how to record conversations legally. But the rest..." He squared his shoulders. "I needed to handle it myself. Needed to prove I wasn't the weak link they thought I was." "You never were," Brian assured him, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "I played along," Alex continued, pulling out more evidence. "Let them think they were winning. Every time they badmouthed you, I acted like it was working. Every time Jack tried to play cool dad, I gave him just enough encouragement to keep going." His smile was sharp, reminiscent of his father's courtroom expression. "They were so focused on manipulating me, they never realized I was documenting everything." Brian watched as his son laid out months of evidence. Text messages, recordings, photographs, detailed notes of every interaction. Each piece carefully dated and organized. Each manipulation documented with legal precision. "The trust fund," Alex said suddenly. "That's what this was really about, wasn't it? Not just your cases, but Grandpa's money?" Brian nodded slowly. They thought if they could prove parental alienation, get full custody, they could access the trust fund as Juana's legal guardians, Alex finished. I figured that out when I overheard them discussing trustees and terms. He met his father's gaze directly. They didn't know I understood what they were talking about. Didn't know I've been studying law books in my spare time. Following in the family business? Brian asked, allowing a rare smile. Someone taught me to always know my rights, Alex replied, his expression serious. To understand the law before someone tries to use it against me? He pulled up one final recording, a conversation between Jack and Juana, discussing their plans in detail. Their voices were clear, incriminating. Once we have custody, we can petition for control of the trust fund, Jack was saying. Brian's reputation will be destroyed, the great attorney who alienated his own son. And with access to his client files, we'll own him. Juana's voice dripped with satisfaction. Everything he's built, everything he's protected, it'll all come crashing down. Alex stopped the recording. That's when I knew we had them. Their whole plan, in their own words. Brian studied his son, seeing the strength that had emerged from betrayal. You understand what happens next? Once we use this evidence. I understand. Alex's voice was firm. They tried to use me as a weapon against you. Tried to make me betray everything you taught me about loyalty, about justice. His expression hardened. Now they get to learn what happens when they underestimate a Reese. Both Reeses, Brian corrected, his pride evident. You've done good work, son. Professional-grade evidence gathering. I learned from the best, Alex replied, then hesitated. Dad, when this goes to court, I want to testify. Want them to see exactly who they tried to manipulate. Brian nodded slowly, recognizing the same steel in his son's spine that had made him unbeatable in court. They thought you were a pawn in their game. They forgot something important, Alex said, gathering his evidence. In chess, a pawn that reaches the other side of the board becomes the most powerful piece in the game. As they organized the evidence for the legal team, Brian watched his son work with methodical precision. They tried to turn Alex against him, to use his own child as a weapon. Instead, they'd awakened something in him, the same relentless pursuit of justice that had made Brian feared in courtrooms across the state. One more thing, Alex said, pulling out a final piece of evidence. I think you should hear what they said about your Morrison case. About their plans for your client files. He pressed play, his expression grim. They didn't just want to hurt you, Dad. They wanted to destroy everything you've built. Viola Hardy paced the conference room, her heels clicking against the floor as she laid out their strategy. The fierce prosecutor-turned-private attorney had built her reputation on taking down corrupt officials and abusive spouses. Now, she faced her most comprehensive case yet. We're not just looking at parental alienation, she declared, gesturing to the evidence spread across the conference table. We're dealing with attempted interference with attorney-client privilege, conspiracy to access confidential information, and psychological manipulation of a minor. She turned to Brian, her expression predatory. They didn't just attack you personally, Brian. They went after your entire practice. Brian nodded, his expression carved from stone. Walk me through the strategy. First, Viola pulled out a thick file. We have the recordings Alex gathered. Legally obtained, properly documented, and devastatingly clear. Jack's attempts to access client information through him? That's enough to end his legal career permanently. The Bar Association? Brian inquired. Already moving on their own investigation, Viola confirmed. But that's just the beginning. Your wife's involvement adds another layer. She turned to a new section of evidence. May Grant came through with everything we needed. She pushed forward a stack of documents, patient records, appointment logs, billing statements. Juana wasn't just using her practice as cover for meetings with Jack. She was actively violating ethical guidelines, using her professional knowledge to orchestrate psychological manipulation of a minor. Her own son. Brian's voice carried quiet fury. Exactly. Viola pulled out more documents. May documented everything. How Juana used patient appointment slots for meetings with Jack. How she applied psychological techniques to maximize the impact of their manipulation. The ethics board is going to have a field day. The conference room door opened, admitting Jackie Muller with another stack of evidence. The financial angle just got stronger, she announced. Found records of Jack accessing trust fund documents through a contact at the bank. Unauthorized attempts to gather information about the terms and trustees. Viola's smile was sharp. Perfect. Add that to the conspiracy charges. She turned back to Brian. We're not just going to win this case. We're going to destroy them so thoroughly they'll never recover. Lay out the sequence, Brian commanded, his trial strategist mind engaging. We start with the professional misconduct, Viola began, laying out documents in precise order. Hit them with ethics violations first, both legal and psychological. That establishes pattern and intent. Then we bring in the conspiracy evidence, the documented meetings, the recorded conversations about accessing client files. She moved to a new section of evidence. The trust fund angle comes next. Proves financial motivation, takes this beyond personal vendetta into criminal conspiracy. Finally, she smiled grimly. We bring in Alex's testimony. Show the human cost of their manipulation. The judges? Brian inquired. Judge Matthews for the custody hearing, Viola confirmed. He's handled several of your cases. Knows your reputation, your integrity. Judge Chun for the criminal aspects. She's got a history of coming down hard on legal ethics violations. Brian nodded slowly. The pieces were aligning perfectly. There's more, Jackie interjected, pulling out her tablet. Found a pattern in Jack's recent cases. Suspicious similarities to your strategies, your client approaches. He's been using the information he gleaned from Alex to mirror your methods. How many cases? Brian's voice was deadly quiet. At least 6 in the past 3 months, Jackie replied. All with unusually favorable outcomes for him. All sharing distinct parallels with your previous cases. Add that to the evidence of attempted access to privileged information, Viola noted, making rapid notes. Shows a pattern of professional misconduct extending beyond the family situation. She turned to Brian, her expression serious. You understand what this means? We're not just looking at loss of custody for Juana, loss of license for both of them. We're talking potential criminal charges. Prison time. Good. Brian's response was immediate, implacable. They tried to use my son to destroy me. Now they learn about consequences. The door opened again, admitting May Grant, Juana's colleague from the psychology practice. The older woman's face was tight with controlled anger. I found more, she announced without preamble. Patient session notes where Juana documented her manipulation techniques. She was literally using our professional resources to plan her psychological warfare. Viola's eyes lit up. That's the final nail. Deliberate misuse of professional knowledge to cause psychological harm to a minor. She gathered the new evidence, adding it to their growing arsenal. The ethics board won't just suspend her license. They'll revoke it permanently. One more thing, May added, her voice hard. Found evidence she was accessing other patient files too, looking for clients who might have connections to Brian's cases. She wasn't just violating Alex's trust. She was compromising our entire practice. Brian absorbed this new information, his expression unchanging but his eyes growing colder. They didn't just try to take my son, he observed quietly. They tried to dismantle everything. My practice, my reputation, my family. And now we dismantle them, Viola confirmed. Legally, professionally, completely. She straightened the files with precise movements. The custody hearing is scheduled for next week. Criminal charges will follow. You want to know the best part? She pulled out one final document, a transcript of Juana's recorded confession in Brian's office. They're so convinced of their cleverness, they have no idea what's coming. No idea that while they were playing their game, we were building an airtight case against them. Keep building, Brian commanded. I want every angle covered, every escape route blocked. When we move, it needs to be decisive. Trust me, Viola's smile was predatory. By the time we're done, they'll wish they'd never heard the name Reese. The courtroom fell silent as Judge Matthews reviewed the final pieces of evidence. Brian sat at the plaintiff's table, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp as he watched Juana and Jack realize the full scope of their defeat. The evidence in this case is overwhelming, Judge Matthews began. his voice carrying the weight of 30 years on the bench. What we have here is not merely a custody dispute, but a calculated campaign of psychological manipulation and professional misconduct. The judge lifted the first document, Alex's detailed recordings and notes. The minor child, demonstrating remarkable presence of mind, documented systematic attempts to alienate him from his father. More disturbingly, these recordings reveal attempts to access privileged client information through manipulation of a minor. Juana's face had lost all color. Beside her, Jack's expensive suit couldn't hide his nervous sweating. Furthermore, the judge continued, the evidence provided by May Grant shows egregious violations of professional psychological ethics. Mrs. Reese not only used her professional knowledge to manipulate her own child, but compromised patient confidentiality in an attempt to gain leverage against her husband's practice. Brian remained perfectly still, watching as years of careful planning crumbled around his wife and former friend. The court finds overwhelming evidence of parental alienation, conspiracy to access privileged information, and psychological abuse of a minor. Judge Matthews' voice hardened. Custody of the minor child is awarded solely to Brian Reese, with Mrs. Reese granted only supervised visitation pending completion of extensive psychological evaluation and counseling. Juana started to protest, but her lawyer gripped her arm, silencing her. Additionally, the judge continued, this court is referring both Mrs. Reese and Mr. Aldrich to their respective professional boards for ethics violations. The evidence of attempted interference with attorney-client privilege and misuse of psychological practice will be forwarded to the district attorney's office for potential criminal charges. The judge paused, looking directly at Juana and Jack. In my 30 years on the bench, I have rarely seen such a calculated attempt to destroy not only a family but a professional practice. The court views these actions with the utmost severity. As the judge concluded the hearing, Brian stood calmly, gathering his documents. He could feel Juana's desperate gaze, Jack's panicked attempts to catch his eye. He ignored them both, turning instead to where Alex sat in the gallery between Mary Ann Hester and Hugo McBride. Later, in the privacy of his office, Brian reviewed the aftermath with his team. Viola Hardy's report was comprehensive. Juana's license has been permanently revoked, she confirmed, reading from her tablet. The psychology board's decision was unanimous. May Grant's evidence of patient confidentiality violations was damning. And Jack? Brian inquired, his voice neutral. The Bar Association moved faster than expected. Viola smiled grimly. His license is suspended pending the criminal investigation. Given the evidence of attempted access to privileged information and the pattern of case manipulation Jackie uncovered, permanent disbarment is virtually certain. The trust fund? Already secured, Hugo confirmed from his position by the door. New trustees appointed, myself and Coach Hester. Ironclad provisions preventing any access attempts through custody claims. Brian nodded, satisfaction evident in his controlled expression. And the criminal charges? Being filed tomorrow, Viola confirmed. The DA is particularly interested in the conspiracy aspects using a minor to attempt accessing privileged client information. They're looking at serious time. A knock at the door interrupted them. Alex entered, his posture straight, his eyes clear. He'd grown in the months since this began, hardened by betrayal but strengthened by justice. Dad, he said, his voice steady. Coach Hester and I were heading to the gym. Thought you might want to join us for a game. Brian studied his son. Not the pawn others had tried to use, but a young man who'd proven himself worthy of the Reese name, who'd turned their manipulation back on them with precise, devastating effect. I think I can make time for that, he agreed, standing. The legal battles were won, the betrayers facing consequences, but this moment with his son, was the true victory. Over the next months, Brian and Alex worked with Chris Houston, a family therapist specializing in parental alienation cases. The sessions weren't about forgiveness. Brian remained adamant about consequences for betrayal, but about understanding the manipulation they'd both faced and strengthening their bond against future threats. They tried to use psychology against us, Alex observed during one session, his insight showing maturity beyond his years. But they didn't understand the difference between manipulation and real connection. Chris nodded approvingly. You both turned their weapons back on them, used their own tactics to expose their true intentions. Speaking of consequences, Brian added, his expression firm. The DA's office called this morning. Both Jack and Juana have accepted plea deals. They'll serve time, albeit less than they deserve. 1 year later, Brian sat in the crowded gymnasium watching Alex compete in the state basketball championships. His son moved with confidence on the court, each play showing the strategic thinking that had helped him outmaneuver those who tried to manipulate him. In the stands around him sat their rebuilt support system. Hugo McBride, whose loyalty had never wavered. Marianne Hester, who'd recognized the manipulation and helped Alex gather evidence. Susanna Gillespie, whose concern had helped expose the plot. May Grant, whose professional integrity had helped bring down Juana's schemes. Even Viola Hardy had taken time from her busy practice to attend. As Alex scored the winning point, Brian reflected on the lessons of the past year. Justice had been served. Juana had lost her license, her reputation, and her freedom to practice psychology. Jack faced not only disbarment but criminal charges for attempting to access privileged information. Their calculated plan to destroy him had instead destroyed them. But more importantly, their attempt to turn his son against him had backfired spectacularly. Alex had not only resisted their manipulation but had turned it back on them with a precision that made Brian proud. The trust fund they tried to access was now securely managed by trustees whose loyalty was beyond question. After the game, as the crowds began to disperse, Alex approached his father, still in his basketball uniform, trophy in hand. "Nice shot at the end there," Brian commented, pride evident in his voice. "Learn from the best," Alex replied, then added with a knowing smile, "about more than just basketball." Brian raised an eyebrow, inviting his son to continue. "The funny thing is," Alex said, his expression thoughtful, "they tried to teach me to hate you, but they just taught me how to spot lies." He gestured to the trophy. "This isn't just about basketball. It's about learning to play the long game." Brian nodded, understanding the deeper meaning. In the safe deposit box at his bank lay the final piece of evidence, Alex's recording of Juana and Jack's manipulation. Not just a legal weapon, but a reminder that sometimes the best defense was simply letting people reveal their true nature. They walked together toward their supporters, father and son, both stronger for having faced betrayal and emerged victorious. The last year had taught them both valuable lessons about loyalty, justice, and the importance of playing the long game. More than the legal victory, more than the professional consequences their betrayers faced, this was Brian's true triumph. A son who had not only resisted manipulation but had learned to recognize and counter it, who had proven himself not just a Reese in name, but in spirit. Together, they had turned a calculated attempt at destruction into a masterclass in justice, proving that in the long game, truth and loyalty would always triumph over manipulation and betrayal. Epilogue. 5 years had passed since the courtroom victory that dismantled Juana and Jack's schemes. Brian Reese sat in his expanded office at Reese, Hardy & Associates, reviewing a familiar case file. The monitoring system on his desk pinged with an alert, another of Juana's denied appeals for unrestricted visitation rights. "Still trying," Hugo McBride commented, entering with fresh coffee. Now a full partner in the firm, Hugo had helped transform their practice into one of the state's leading family law specialists, with a particular focus on parental alienation cases. "Let her," Brian replied, his voice carrying the same implacable certainty that had made him legendary in courtrooms across 3 states. "Every appeal strengthens the precedent we've set." The years had not softened Brian's stance on betrayal. If anything, the aftermath of Juana and Jack's scheme had reinforced his reputation for ruthless efficiency in dealing with those who crossed ethical lines. "How's she doing these days?" Hugo asked, though they both kept meticulous track of their former opponents. Brian pulled up a detailed report on his screen. "Still working as a restaurant hostess in Phoenix. 4th job in 3 years. Seems no one wants to hire a former psychologist who lost her license for manipulating her own child." His smile held no warmth. The psychological board's decision to permanently revoke her license rather than suspend it was comprehensive. May Grant's testimony was crucial there, Hugo noted. "Speaking of May, her practice is thriving. She's become the go-to expert witness in psychological ethics cases." Brian nodded approvingly. Loyalty, he'd always maintained, should be rewarded as thoroughly as betrayal should be punished. May's integrity in exposing Juana's ethical violations had earned her a permanent place in their professional network. And our friend Jack? Hugo inquired, though they both knew the answer. Still serving his 3-year sentence for attempting to access privileged client information, Brian replied with clinical satisfaction. The DA was particularly interested in how he'd used information gleaned from Alex to manipulate outcomes in his cases. His disbarment is permanent. The Bar Association made sure of that. He pulled up another report. His assets were liquidated to pay restitution to his former clients. Currently owns nothing but prison commissary debt. Upon release, he'll be prohibited from working in any legal-adjacent field. Brian's expression showed the same controlled fury that had driven him during the original case. He tried to use my son to destroy my practice. Now he'll spend the rest of his life watching daytime court shows, wondering where it all went wrong. Speaking of Alex, Hugo's tone lightened considerably. How's law school treating him? Now Brian's expression showed genuine pride. Top of his class at Stanford. The professors say they've never seen anyone with such a natural talent for strategic thinking and evidence analysis. He gestured to a framed newspaper article on his wall. Alex's admission to law school had made headlines, given the high-profile nature of their case. Following in your footsteps? Blazing his own trail, Brian corrected. He's focusing on cyber law and digital evidence. Says the future of legal battles will be fought through technology. He smiled slightly, though he still credits that hidden camera experience for teaching him the importance of documented evidence. Hugo nodded thoughtfully. The whole experience changed him, made him stronger, made him cautious, Brian agreed. He vets everyone in his life now. Takes nothing at face value. His expression hardened. A hard lesson, but a necessary one. The intercom buzzed, Brian's assistant announcing Marianne Hester's arrival for their monthly trust fund review. As co-trustees, Marianne and Hugo had managed Alex's inheritance with the same dedication they'd shown in exposing the original manipulation. Coach Hester's timing is perfect, Brian noted, pulling up the trust fund documents. Alex's latest proposal for expanding our digital forensics department needs review. Marianne entered, still carrying herself with the straightforward authority that had made her such a valuable ally. Now retired from coaching, she'd become a sought-after consultant on youth protection issues, using her experience with Alex's case to help other families identify and counter manipulation. Just got off the phone with Susanna Gillespie, she announced, taking her seat. The educational conference wants us all to present again, identifying and preventing parental alienation in schools. Your session on legal frameworks was particularly popular last year. Brian nodded. They transformed their experience into a comprehensive training program, helping educators and counselors recognize the signs they'd missed early in Alex's case. Susanna, now a school administrator, had been instrumental in implementing these protocols across the state. How's our girl Viola doing? Marianne asked, referring to Viola Hardy, who'd become Brian's partner after their successful collaboration. Currently demolishing opposing counsel in the Martinez case, Brian replied with professional appreciation. Same strategy we used with Juana, letting them reveal their own manipulations through documented evidence. The Martinez case was just one of many. Their firm had become known for handling complex family law cases, particularly those involving psychological manipulation and alienation attempts. Brian's ruthless efficiency, combined with Viola's prosecutorial experience, made them unbeatable in cases involving betrayal and manipulation. Any word from Juana's last supervised visit? Marianne inquired carefully. Brian's expression cooled noticeably. Alex maintains minimal contact. Professional courtesy, nothing more. He views her as a case study in manipulation techniques. His smile was sharp. Actually uses transcripts from her attempts to turn him against me in his law school ethics presentations. The irony wasn't lost on any of them. Juana had tried to use psychology to destroy her son's relationship with his father. Instead, she provided future legal professionals with a masterclass in detecting and countering manipulation. The supervisor's report she still tries to justify her actions, Hugo added, reviewing recent documentation. Claims she was acting in Alex's best interest. Can't understand why he won't forgive her. Some betrayals don't get forgiveness, Brian stated flatly. They get consequences. His phone buzzed with a text from Alex. Just finished my article on digital evidence in alienation cases. Sending final draft for review. Coffee tomorrow to discuss? Brian's response was immediate. Usual place, 9 a.m. Proud of you, son. The message thread showed their regular communication, case discussions, legal theories, basketball scores. The relationship Juana and Jack had tried to destroy had instead been forged into something unbreakable. Did you see this? Marianne pulled up a news article on her tablet. Jack's trying to write a book about his wrongful conviction from prison. Claims he was the victim of a conspiracy. Let him. Brian's voice held cold amusement. Our defamation attorneys could use the practice. Besides, he added, pulling up another document, the real story is already being published. Alex's law review article on our case has been accepted by the Stanford Law Review. Digital evidence and parental alienation. A case study in counter-manipulation. He pulled up another report. His assets were liquidated to pay restitution to his former clients. Currently owns nothing but prison commissary debt. Upon release, he'll be prohibited from working in any legal adjacent field. Brian's expression showed the same controlled fury that had driven him during the original case. He tried to use my son to destroy my practice. Now he'll spend the rest of his life watching daytime court shows, wondering where it all went wrong. Speaking of Alex, Hugo's tone lightened considerably. How's law school treating him? Now Brian's expression showed genuine pride. Top of his class at Stanford. The professors say they've never seen anyone with such a natural talent for strategic thinking and evidence analysis. He gestured to a framed newspaper article on his wall. Alex's admission to law school had made headlines, given the high-profile nature of their case. Following in your footsteps? Blazing his own trail, Brian corrected. He's focusing on cyber law and digital evidence. Says the future of legal battles will be fought through technology. He smiled slightly, though he still credits that hidden camera experience for teaching him the importance of documented evidence. Hugo nodded thoughtfully. The whole experience changed him, made him stronger, made him cautious, Brian agreed. He vets everyone in his life now, takes nothing at face value. His expression hardened. A hard lesson, but a necessary one. The intercom buzzed, Brian's assistant announcing Marianne Hester's arrival for their monthly trust fund review. As co-trustees, Marianne and Hugo had managed Alex's inheritance with the same dedication they'd shown in exposing the original manipulation. Coach Hester's timing is perfect, Brian noted, pulling up the trust fund documents. Alex's latest proposal for expanding our digital forensics department needs review. Marianne entered, still carrying herself with the straightforward authority that had made her such a valuable ally. Now retired from coaching, she'd become a sought-after consultant on youth protection issues, using her experience with Alex's case to help other families identify and counter manipulation. Just got off the phone with Susanna Gillespie, she announced, taking her seat. The educational conference wants us all to present again, identifying and preventing parental alienation in schools. Your session on legal frameworks was particularly popular last year. Brian nodded. They transformed their experience into a comprehensive training program, helping educators and counselors recognize the signs they'd missed early in Alex's case. Susanna, now a school administrator, had been instrumental in implementing these protocols across the state. How's our girl Viola doing? Marianne asked, referring to Viola Hardy, who'd become Brian's partner after their successful collaboration. Currently demolishing opposing counsel in the Martinez case, Brian replied with professional appreciation. Same strategy we used with Juana, letting them reveal their own manipulations through documented evidence. The Martinez case was just one of many. Their firm had become known for handling complex family law cases, particularly those involving psychological manipulation and alienation attempts. Brian's ruthless efficiency, combined with Viola's prosecutorial experience, made them unbeatable in cases involving betrayal and manipulation. Any word from Juana's last supervised visit? Marianne inquired carefully. Brian's expression cooled noticeably. Alex maintains minimal contact. Professional courtesy, nothing more. He views her as a case study in manipulation techniques. His smile was sharp. Actually uses transcripts from her attempts to turn him against me in his law school ethics presentations. The irony wasn't lost on any of them. Juana had tried to use psychology to destroy her son's relationship with his father. Instead, she provided future legal professionals with a masterclass in detecting and countering manipulation. The supervisors report she still tries to justify her actions, Hugo added. Reviewing recent documentation, claims she was acting in Alex's best interest. Can't understand why he won't forgive her. Some betrayals don't get forgiveness, Brian stated flatly. They get consequences. His phone buzzed with a text from Alex. Just finished my article on digital evidence in alienation cases. Sending final draft for review. Coffee tomorrow to discuss? Brian's response was immediate. Usual place, 9 a.m. Proud of you, son. The message thread showed their regular communication, case discussions, legal theories, basketball scores. The relationship Juana and Jack had tried to destroy had instead been forged into something unbreakable. Did you see this? Marianne pulled up a news article on her tablet. Jack's trying to write a book about his wrongful conviction from prison. Claims he was the victim of a conspiracy. Let him. Brian's voice held cold amusement. Our defamation attorneys could use the practice. Besides, he added, pulling up another document, the real story is already being published. Alex's law review article on our case has been accepted by the Stanford Law Review. Digital evidence and parental alienation. A case study in counter-manipulation. The article would join the growing body of legal literature their case had spawned. Brian had kept his promise, not just destroying those who'd betrayed him, but ensuring their downfall served as a warning to others who might attempt similar manipulation. One more thing, Hugo mentioned, pulling out a final report. Juana's therapy practice partner from Phoenix finally gave us the full story. Seems she tried to start over, build a new practice under a different name. When her background check revealed the ethical violations, he smiled grimly. Let's just say her professional reputation is permanently toxic. Brian absorbed this information with satisfaction. The consequences of betrayal should be permanent, he'd always maintained. Juana had used her professional knowledge to attempt psychological manipulation of a child. Now she would spend the rest of her life being defined by that choice. Alex mentioned something interesting in his last email, Marianne said, changing the subject. Says he's been consulting with the FBI's cybercrime division. Apparently, our case has become a template for identifying digital evidence of parental alienation attempts. Brian nodded, pride evident in his expression. He's taken what they tried to use against him and turned it into a weapon for justice. Currently developing software to help track digital manipulation patterns in family court cases. The irony was perfect. Juana and Jack had tried to use Alex's youth and trust against him, had attempted to manipulate him into betraying his father. Instead, they'd helped create a legal warrior specialized in exposing exactly the kind of manipulation they'd attempted. As they concluded their meeting, Brian's assistant announced another visitor, Chris Houston, the family therapist who'd helped them process the manipulation attempt. Now a regular consultant for their firm, Chris had developed specialized protocols for working with families affected by alienation attempts. Just finished reviewing Alex's latest psychological analysis of the manipulation techniques used in your case, Chris announced, entering with a thick manuscript. It's brilliant. He's managed to break down every layer of their strategy, showing exactly how they tried to exploit family dynamics for financial gain. Send me a copy, Brian requested, already planning to add it to their growing case library. Our associates should study this. Understanding manipulation is key to countering it. The meeting continued, discussing ongoing cases and strategies, but Brian's thoughts turned to Alex. His son had taken the betrayal that should have destroyed him and transformed it into strength, into expertise, into a weapon against future manipulators. Later that evening, alone in his office, Brian reviewed old case files, the documentation of their victory, the evidence that had destroyed those who tried to destroy him. Juana, now struggling to rebuild any semblance of a life in Phoenix, her professional reputation permanently ruined. Jack, counting days in a prison cell, his legal career not just ended but erased. Their elaborate scheme had cost them everything: careers, freedom, dignity. But the real victory wasn't in their destruction. It was in the legacy their betrayal had inadvertently created. A father and son bound stronger by attempted manipulation. A law firm specialized in protecting families from similar schemes. A growing body of legal and psychological literature helping others identify and counter such manipulation attempts. They had tried to play the long game, had thought themselves clever enough to outmaneuver a master strategist. Instead, they'd learned the most important lesson of all. In the game of justice, betrayal always carried the highest price. Brian's phone buzzed one final time that evening. Another text from Alex. Found something interesting in Jack's prison correspondence. Seems he's still trying to convince people he was framed. Want to see his latest attempts at manipulation? Brian's response was immediate. Always. Some people never learn. But we do. The message thread ended with a shared understanding. Those who had tried to destroy their relationship had instead made it unbreakable, had tried to manipulate a child into betrayal, but had instead created a warrior for justice. And in the end, that was the true long game. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.